Welcome back. We are on, let's see, lesson number 12. We're going to begin the book of Ruth in our Sunday school lessons here in our quarterly. And so if you want to turn to Ruth chapter 1, we're going to be looking at Ruth 1 and 2 today. So that is there's a lot to cover. There's a lot of really great lessons in the book of Ruth. Now, it's necessary to start with when is this taking place? Of course, we've just left the book of the Judges. And verse 1 of Ruth chapter 1 tells us, now it came to pass in those days when the judges ruled. So we know that, first of all, that this took place in the time of the judges, which was a very challenging time for the children of Israel, wasn't it? Do you remember what we covered in that book? It was a lot of ups and downs and lots of valleys and some great things happened in the book of the Judges too, right? Gideon was one of the highlights of the book, and that was probably the biggest highlight, and there was certainly some valleys there too. Ruth is 4 chapters long, so it doesn't take very long to read. If you want to go back or you want to start right now, if you haven't read it, I'd suggest that you go ahead and read the book and get a sense of what the book is talking about, because again, I won't be able to hit all of the points, but if there is ever any question, something that I did not cover that you would like for me to cover, you can email me. That's probably the easiest way to get a hold of me, pastortier@gmail.com. I'd be glad to help you out any way that I can, and or something that I say that may be questionable to you, be glad to go over that as well. I know sometimes on these videos, sometimes I watch them and they're questionable to me too, so it might just be a matter of me saying the wrong thing. Whenever I tape these, I usually tape them one shot and that's it. So if I do something wrong, it's there. All right, I don't usually tape it 3 or 4 times. It would just take me way too long to do that, and I don't have that kind of time. But anyway, and then there's also some times that I wish that I had covered something that I didn't. And so I'll just put that out there to you right now, especially for those that may be new to this channel, Pastor Tier. And I am the pastor of Tyler Road Baptist Church. And I invite you to be with us at 10 o'clock every Sunday morning whenever we take on these Sunday school lessons. It's usually either me or Brother Brock that teaches the adult Sunday school class. We also have some kids classes too. So we have got Sunday school for all ages. So just come on and be encouraged and participate in the lesson as well. Really good times. And so anyway, we'll jump in here to the book of Ruth. And probably the main thing that I gain out of all of this whole book is that even in times of judgment, God can still be praised and God can still be found in this, and that's what we see throughout this. The narrator of the book never really mentions the Lord. Now, some of the characters mention the Lord, but the narrator of the book never mentions the Lord. But what he does do is he shows God's working, okay, such as in chapter 2 and verse 3, and she went and came and gleaned in the field after the reapers, and her hap was on the light, was to light on the part of the field belonging to Boaz. And we see that God is working there, because we know that it doesn't happen. We don't happen on a place by luck or by chance. We happen on those places because of the Lord leading us and providing for us. Okay, and so we start off with a kind of a sad couple of verses to begin with. This book takes in basically three main characters of the book. There's other characters as well, but the 3 main characters is going to be Ruth, Naomi, her mother-in-law, and Boaz. Okay, so as you look there, you'll see it'll kind of fill in their characters as we go here as well. All right, so Ruth chapter 1 and verse 1, now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled that there was a famine in the land. All right, and usually whenever you see famines in the land, that is God trying to test or judge Israel. They were always blessed whenever they were serving God, but whenever they got out of line with God, usually famines and pestilence and war, Midianites, Philistines would come in to prod them back into the way of God, to the service of God. So there was a famine in the land. All right, and a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. All right, so Bethlehem is a very famous place, right? Who was born in Bethlehem that you remember? That's right, Jesus. Now, we're coming upon the season right now. I'm teaching this in November. We're coming upon the Christmas season. This is actually a good intro into the Christmas message, because remember, Joseph had to come back to Bethlehem because that's where his descendants were from. And hopefully you've already read the book of Ruth. You find out that actually Ruth is going to wind up being Jesus' great grandmother, okay, as it happens. Now, look, we're going to see some things about Ruth that's going to stand out, that's going to be like, I can't believe that God would pick her to be his grandmother as far as her lineage and everything goes. But he did. And so anyhow, this starts off in Bethlehem, and that's where Joseph was going to have to go back to, is to Bethlehem, because that's where his descendants were from. There's another famous person that was born in this lineage as well that we recognize, and that is that's right, King David. I heard you say it. So King David was born in this lineage too. All right, so pretty cool stuff, isn't it? So there's a lot that's happened. Bethlehem means house of bread as well. It's probably a good thing for us to remember as we look at this passage. And now it was the house of bread was in famine. And we also see that it was in Judah. Bethlehem, Judah, it would be like saying Henderson, Texas. Okay, it tells you the state as well as the city there. And you'll see that throughout the scriptures as well. So a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. All right, so where did they go to? Where did they leave from? They left from Bethlehem to go to Moab. Now, Moab was a sworn enemy of Israel, if you remember right. And the Psalms mentions Moab as being God's washpot. Moab was, you remember how Moab got started, or whose descendants they were. That's right, they came from Lot. Remember, Lot had 2 illegitimate children through his daughters, and one of them was Moab. One of them's name was Moab, and this is through their lineage. They also did not help Israel whenever they came from Egypt. Them and Edom kind of ganged up on them. And so they weren't friendly to the Israelites. However, this is where he's running from the house of bread, basically from God, to an idolatrous nation. And that is never the thing to do. Even in judgment, we can't run from God. Understand that. We cannot run from God. You can't hide from God. Ask Jonah. Jonah knows all about that, right? You cannot run from him. You can't hide from God. Whenever it's time for that chastisement, it's time. You know, I remember whenever I was a kid, my mom was actually the one that usually carried out the punishment in our home whenever I was growing up. And she had a very good memory. And so if she said, you're going to get a spanking when you get home, that meant that you were. There was a promise that it didn't matter what you said or what you did between now and then, it was going to happen. And so God is much the same way. Whenever it comes to chastisement, you can't run from it. You can't hide from it. You may as well bear up under it and be repentant the best that you can. Ask for mercy and grace. That's the best thing you can. The worst thing that you can do, and I learned this as a kid too, the worst thing that you can do is run from it. That would actually make the punishment worse than if you just stayed and bore up under it. Did you learn that too when you were a kid? Hopefully you did. It's that way you don't have to learn it from God, right? Okay. So he was running from the house of bread to an idolatrous nation of Moab. He left there with his wife and his 2 sons. So he's bringing his family into this as well. And this is important to know as we get into the next couple of verses. And the name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the name of his 2 sons Milion and Kilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem, Judah. And they came unto the country of Moab and continued there. And Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left and her 2 sons. So I don't know if it was as soon as they moved down there or they had been down there a while. It doesn't tell us, but Elimelech died while they were down in Moab. So he did not get away from the chastisement of God, right? God knew exactly where he was, and he died while he was down there. And now he's leaving his wife as a widow in a foreign land. Not a good thing, is it? But thanks be to God that God can make a message out of a mess, right? That's what I always heard, that God can make a message out of a mess. And so he's making a mess here, but actually there's going to be a very beautiful message out of all this. No matter what sins that you've committed, no matter what you've done, God can still use you. If you'll be repentant towards him and turn back to him, God can still use you. That's a blessing. All right. So she was left with her 2 sons. Verse 4 says, and they took them wives of the women of Moab. Now, what problem do you see that could have come from that? To take wives from an idolatrous land. Now, I know how the story turns out. I'm not saying that, but what could have happened here? That's right. They could have become idolaters and had to stay in the land where they were. All right. So, again, this is certainly something to think about. All right. So they took them wives of Moab. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other was Ruth. And they dwelled for about 10 years. They're about 10 years. So I'm guessing after Elimelech died, they were there for 10 years. All right. And Milian and Chilion died also, both of them, and the woman was left of her 2 sons and her husband. So now Naomi has no more boys and no more man. And that was a very bad situation for a woman to be in those days. We don't even realize how hard it was. We were just talking about in the Sermon on the Mount how that those men were able to give their women writings of divorcement, and they were doing it for any reason at all. But whenever they didn't have a man backing them, they were put into a poverty situation, basically. The women didn't work like they do now and do all of those things, and so it would have been a very, very tough situation for Naomi. Now she is basically on her own. She has no livelihood coming in, and in her mind, she's not going to have any kind of help whatsoever other than what she can get from her family back in Bethlehem. That's the reason why she's going to pick up and go back there, because otherwise she's in a godless land. There wasn't a welfare system. There wasn't government handouts or anything like that. You were on your own, and you were either going to die from starvation or poverty, or you were just going to live in a very impoverished situation. So this is what and even in Israel, she was headed for this as well, because that they ran from God is the idea behind all of this, right? Is that he ran from God, and that's the reason why that they're in this situation that they're in. So now she doesn't have any boys to take care of her, but she does have these 2 daughters-in-law. All right, so let's see what happens. And she arose and her daughters-in-law that she might return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab how that the Lord had visited his people in giving them bread. So she had heard back that Bethlehem was actually having a better time of it, and so now she's ready to head out. So she arose with her daughters-in-law and to return back to Bethlehem, Judah. Wherefore she went forth out of the place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her, and they went on their way and returned unto the land of Judah. Now Naomi said, verse 8, unto her 2 daughters-in-law, go return each to her mother's house, and the Lord deal kindly unto you as you have dealt with me, and dealt with the dead and with me. All right, so Naomi here says, look, you may as well, you're heading for poverty, so why don't you turn back right now and go back to your mother's house. Maybe you'll find yourself a husband, maybe your parents will take care of you, but I'm not in any kind of situation where I can take care of you at all. All right. And they said to her, verse 10, surely we will return with thee unto thy people. All right. So both of them said this. Ruth and Orpah said, Oh, we'll go back with you. Okay. Then Naomi said, turn again, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Are there any more sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands? Turn again, my daughters. Go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, if I should have a husband also tomorrow, and should bear sons, well, will you tarry for them till they're grown? Would you stay for them from having husbands? Nay, my daughters, for it grieveth me much for your sakes, that the hand of the Lord is gone out. And in verse 14 it says, and they lifted up their voice and wept again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clave unto her. All right, so what we have here is then Naomi, after they both said they would stay with her, Naomi is like, look, I don't have any more kids to give. I'm not going to have any more sons. I'm too old for that. And even if I did, are you going to stay around until they're old enough to marry you? Because that was the custom of the day, and that's what we're going to get into in a later chapters about the kinsman redeemer. Is that if one son died, then it would be his duty to take the widow. The other son, it would be his duty to take the widow and take care of her and raise up seed with her. Okay, we'll talk about that later on in this book, The Kinsman Redeemer. But anyhow, what we have here is that Naomi's like, I'm not going to have any more kids. And even if I did, if I had kids today, are you going to stay until they're grown? And so Orpah kissed her and says, okay, well, I'm headed back. It's almost like the idea that she hadn't really thought about the situation that she's going into. And Jesus even talks about this, is that before we make commitments, we do need to count the cost and make sure that we're willing to go through with the commitments that we make. We don't need to just make commitments that are just spur of the moment. Jesus said, and we'll get into this in the Sermon on the Mount, but let your yeas be yeas and your nays be nays. In other words, when you make a commitment, you say, yes, I'm going to do something, you need to be willing to go through with that commitment. So be careful of the commitments that you make, count the cost, and then go ahead and go through with it and stay with it no matter what happens. Well, Orpah hadn't thought about the cost of this and what was going to happen. And so instead of going with Naomi and Ruth, she turns her back and says, okay, well, I'm going to go on back to my mother's house. But we see that Ruth's commitment was one that we all need to have. That this type of commitment, that we stay the course no matter what. She knew what the obstacles were. She knew what it meant, and it says that she clave to her. This is the kind of thing that we need to have. Let's just go at it. We need to have this kind of commitment in our churches, don't we? Whenever we join a church, that we're going to stay after it. We're going to go after it. We're going to do what God wants us to do. Too many people are willing that as soon as hard times come, or they find out that it wasn't exactly like they thought, that they turn right around and they head out those doors, and you never see them again, because they don't understand that, hey, every church has got problems. Every church has got things that they need done. And so they didn't count the costs, and you never see them again. And that's sad. It's really sad that we're not willing to stick with it. The other side to that is that not only in our churches, but also in our marriages. How many marriages go like this? You know, they find out that she's not the woman that he thought she was going to be. He's not the man that she thought he was going to be. They had to go through tough times, and they've got financial difficulties. They've got this and that, in-laws and kids and all this kind of stuff, and it bubbles up to being too much. And then all of a sudden they turn around and go back, and they don't keep the commitments that they made. Boy, this goes on every line, doesn't it? The cost of being a Christian, a follower of Jesus Christ, is the same way. And again, Jesus talks about this. This is something that we need to understand, that there is a cost to serving God. There is a cost to following after Him. You do need to count the cost. But when you count the cost, what you're going to find out is it's worth every bit of the hard times that we go through to follow after Him. Okay? And so once you lay your track down, and once you put your face like flint, you need to go after it and stay after it, and not go AWOL on Jesus Christ. Don't turn your back on Him. You need to go forward. You need to be in that number, right? All right, so we need to be more like Ruth, I guess is what I'm saying, and not like Orpah. But we do need people to question our sincerity. Satan will question your sincerity. Don't think that when you make a commitment that all of a sudden everything's there's no challenges or anything like that. There's going to be people that will question it. They're going to say, "Are you really serious about this? Why are you doing this?" And they may even make fun of you and all this kind of stuff for making the commitment that you have. You need to go ahead and say, I'm going to go ahead and go through with it. I don't care what everybody else thinks. I don't care what everybody else does. This is what I'm going to do. This is the commitment that I'm making, and it's between me and my Lord, and that's the way that it is. There's some really good lessons in here, isn't it? Let's go on. Let's see the kind of commitment that Ruth made. This is the kind of commitment that we need to make. A lot of people use these passages here for their weddings, and it's fitting. It really is. All right, but it says that Ruth clave unto her and said unto her, Behold, this is what Naomi said, Behold, thy sister-in-law is gone back unto her people and unto her gods. Return thou after thy sister-in-law. So even though that Ruth clave to her, Naomi hasn't quit. She's like, look, there's no turning back. I'm not walking you back down to Moab here. This is a good place for you to turn around. If you're not willing to give up everything that you have, your gods, all of these things, if you come back to Israel, there's not going to be any of this hobnobbing with the Moab gods. It's not going to be any of that stuff. You're going to have to make your commitment, and it's going to have to stick. No turning back, right? This is what Ruth said, Entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For whether thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. Where thou diest, will I die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if aught but death part thee and me. So, this is the commitment that she made to her mother-in-law. How about having a friend like that? That's pretty good, isn't it? I mean, we're talking about mates and church members, all this kind of stuff. It'd be good just to have a good friend like that, right? No matter what you're going through, I'm going to be there for you. I'm going to be right by your side. If it means that we got to live in a grass hut or down by the river, we're going to do it. I'm going to be right there with you. It doesn't matter if we're eating steak or we're eating beans, which both of them sound pretty good to me right now. I'm willing to do that, right? Whatever that it is, I'm willing to go with you no matter what. And your God is going to be my God. I've completely turned my back on this other stuff and following after him. This is the kind of commitments that we need, isn't it? Boy, if you had a committed friend like that, that's all you'd need. You have one of them. I know people talk about having 5 and all that kind of stuff, but I'd take one. Wouldn't you? And I'd take that in my spouse. I would take that in my kids if they had that kind of commitment. I think God would take that from us too, don't you? I think that's the kind of people that he's looking for, to follow after him, ones that say, no matter what, Lord, no matter where you want me to live, no matter what you want me to do, no matter where you want me to serve, who it means, I'm going to turn my back on everything else and just follow after you. That's a great, great commitment. I see that from his disciples, don't you? Whenever they left their nets to follow Jesus. That would have to be, we talk about that all the time, but which one of us would do that, would just walk off from our job? If God called us right now and he said, this is what I want you to do, would we be willing to just walk away from everything and follow after Jesus Christ? It's a good question. All right. So, Naomi, in verse 18, it says, when she saw that she was steadfastly minded to go with her, then she left speaking with her. So as soon as Naomi saw that she was set, and this is her attitude, she quit asking her about it, and Ruth came with Naomi to Bethlehem. All right. So, and remember, Ruth didn't know what she was walking into. Well, I mean, what she thought she was walking into was poverty. We know what the rest of the story. We know about Boaz. We know about the fields. We know about him leaving food for them. We know about all of that stuff. And we know about her lineage with Jesus. She didn't know that when she made this commitment. She didn't know any of that stuff was going to exist. And even though that the Bible reports on stuff like this, And Daniel didn't know that he was coming out of the lion's den. The 3 Hebrew children didn't know that they were coming out of the fiery furnace. And we always think about those stories, but there's millions, countless others that they don't turn out like this. This is our hope, that when we do this, that, hey, everything's going to turn out okay. But it may mean that we live in poverty for the rest of our lives. It may mean that we live destitute. It may mean that. I can't say for sure. But we need to have the same attitude that the 3 Hebrew children had when they went into the fiery furnace. They told old Nebuchadnezzar, they said, whether our God is able to deliver us, but whether he does or not, it's not, we're not going to bow down regardless. If we have to burn, we have to burn. And that right there is the kind of commitment that we need. Wouldn't you say? All right, so then they come back to Bethlehem. They too went down to Bethlehem. And all the city came around about them, and they said, is this Naomi? That's verse 19. Verse 20 says, and she said unto them, call me not Naomi, call me Mara, for the Lord Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. Okay, so Naomi says, don't call me Naomi, which means blessed. Don't call me that anymore. Call me bitter. Mara, which means bitter. And that was what they named the river. Remember that Moses poured all of the idols into it, made them drink. They said, this is Mara, or bitter, a bitter river. She says, I went out full, and the Lord hath brought me again empty. Why call me Naomi, seeing that the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has afflicted me? So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, with her, and she returned out of the country of Moab, and she came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. Naomi thought everything was down, right? I mean, she's bitter at this point. That's what she says. Just call me bitter. I've lost everything. I lost my husband. I lost my sons. I've lost everything. But what she could not see was standing right there before her. And even though that she lost those things, God had given her something else in Ruth, and something that was going to be better than what she ever had to begin with. And boy, this is so hard for us to remember and to know, is that we feel like that everything is gone, everything's a loss. But God looks at it completely different. If we're not careful, we miss the hand of God's blessing being on our life. And that's really what we see here is this turning that God does to Naomi, where she feels like she's not blessed, but that she's in a bitter situation, and she is feeling bitter, so much so that she didn't see all this. But we already have 2 things going for her. Number 1, Ruth came with her that she wasn't expecting. That's a blessing. The other thing is that at the time that she's coming was the time of the barley harvest. God was going to be able to take care of her. Okay? You can now, this is coming back to God's people, and this is the reason why we need to be around God's people. This is the reason why that God's people need to be living out the things in the scriptures, is that God had put some provisions in his law for those that were poverty stricken. Okay? One of those things was he didn't provide a welfare system, but he provided that whenever a man went out to glean his field, that he would leave the corners of the field for those that were in poverty to come out there and pick and eat. And another thing that he did is he told them not to glean it twice. In other words, if they left some of the crop in the field, they were just to leave that for those that were poverty stricken and also for foreigners. Okay? Now, this is what Naomi and Ruth were going to have to bank on, is these corners of the field and for anything that was left over in the field. All right? For their subsistence. Otherwise, they wouldn't have anything. And so as they would come into these wheat fields, that's what they were. There wasn't corn like we think of corn. This was wheat that they were harvesting at this time. And Naomi, it says in verse 1 of chapter 2, and Naomi had a kinsman of her husband's, a mighty man of wealth of the family of Elimelech, and his name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabitess said unto Naomi, let me go into the field and glean ears of corn or wheat after him, in whose sight I shall find grace. And she said unto her, go, my daughter. All right, and so this is, so it introduces Boaz to us here, who was the son of Rahab and Rahab and the spy that went into the land, Salmon. Okay, Salmon this was their son, and they must have dwelt. This is where they lived, was in Bethlehem. This was the place where they settled in. All right, and so anyway, she's going to look for a field where she can go and pick some of this wheat. And we're introduced to Boaz, which is whose field is who she's going to happen to be, and that's what we read earlier. Verse 3 says, and she went and came and gleaned in the field after the reapers, and her hap was to light on the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the kindred of Elimelech. All right, so she just happened to go into this field. Now, what this tells us about Boaz is that he was already a man of God because he was concerned with the laws of God and leaving those corners. If you were a selfish person and you owned the field, what would you do? That's right, you'd pick everything. But if you're following after what God said, you would leave those corners, you would leave the gleanings in the field for those that might have some need. All right, and this is what it was for. It was for those widows, and it was for foreigners that didn't have a place to eat. So she happens on the field of Boaz. And again, whenever we happen to do something, this isn't by luck or by chance. This is by God's. God is the one that happens us to do these things. Verse 4 said, and behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem and said unto his reapers, the Lord be with you. And they answered, the Lord bless thee. It's good to have a good boss, isn't it? Boaz was a godly man, and he praised God whenever he came in the field, and he asked God's blessing on his workers. And his workers also asked God to bless their boss as well. I think that's a good tribute, don't you? But what it's doing is it's shaping us up to see what kind of man this Boaz was, that she happened to be a part of his field. Verse 5 says, then said Boaz unto his servants that was set over the reapers, whose damsel is this? And the servant that was set over the reapers answered and said, it is the Moabitish damsel that came back with Naomi out of the country of Moab. And she said, I pray you, let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves. So she came and hath continued even from the morning until now, and she tarried a little while in the house. All right, so what does this tell us about Ruth as well? When Ruth got back, she didn't just sit around the house and just mope and be bitter with Naomi. She got up and she went to work. Brothers and sisters, I'm going to tell you something. One of the things that will change your attitude more than anything else from going to bitter to going to better is to get to work. Okay? I mentioned this I just preached my Thanksgiving sermon just a little bit ago in the book of Jeremiah. But that's exactly what God told them in the book of Jeremiah when they were brought into the land of Babylon, is they needed to get up and go to work. Don't be better, be better. Don't be bitter, be better. Okay? And so this is what we need to learn as well here with Naomi and Ruth, is that Ruth, she could have let Naomi draw her into this bitterness, but instead she says, I'm going to go out there and look for some food. I'm not going to sit here and just starve to death. I want to go out there and do something. And God saw that, and God rewarded it. God rewards our labor. Do you believe that? When we labor, God rewards it. When we go out and just do something, God is going to bless it. And that's what he does here with Ruth. All right. She brings him into this godly man's field who just happens to be her kinsman and going to be her redeemer. Okay. But she doesn't even know all of this. All she knows is that she's just getting up to go to work. And she just happens in the right field at the right place at the right time. And she's not just stopped. She's worked all day long, just like the other servants have. She didn't just come to get a meal. She's coming there to work. All right. And this is being seen by them. Then said, let's see. So she asked if she could do it, and she had been there all morning. And she tarried a little in the house. Verse 8 says, then said Boaz unto Ruth, hearest thou not, my daughter? Go not to glean in any other field, neither go from hence, but abide here fast by my maidens, and let thine eyes be on the field that they do reap, and go thou after them. Have I not charged the young men that they shall not touch thee? And when thou art athirst, go to the vessel and drink of that which which the young men have drawn. Now, you don't understand how great of a blessing this is. So what he's done is he's provided her safety while she does this, and he says, go right after the maidens. After my maidens have picked, then you go right in after them and make sure you get what they've got, and I'm going to make sure that you have water to drink while you're out here. God is blessing. That's what you don't understand is in bitterness. If we just sit there and we mope around, nothing can happen. But when we get up off of it and we get to work, then God can begin to bless, and he can go from bitterness to being better. What a blessing that is. All right. Then she fell on her face and bowed herself to the ground and said unto him, why have I found grace in thine eyes, that thou shouldest take knowledge of me, seeing I am a stranger? And Boaz answered and said unto her, it has been fully shown to me all that thou hast done unto thy mother-in-law since the death of thy husband, and how that thou hast left thy father and thy mother in the land of thy nativity, and art come unto a people which thou knowest not thereto. All right, so he says, I've already looked into it. I know what you've done. I know how you left your homeland to take care of your mother-in-law, and that just speaks volumes. God blesses us and brings us in the presence of people that can be a blessing to us during our hard times. Now, the hard time hasn't passed for Naomi and hasn't passed for Ruth, but this is going to help them through those hard times, isn't it? To bring them to a better place. All right. The Lord recompense thy work, and a full reward be given thee of the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings thou art come to trust. He's saying, look, you are in a different place under a different God right now, and you have trusted in God. I want to show you that God is going to take care of you. And he does that through his people. God doesn't just rain down bread on our houses, but he does bless us through his people. And we, as God's people, need to be a blessing to those that are hurting, those that are helpless, and show them whenever they trust in God, man, they have no need to worry about it, because we're going to make sure that they're taken care of. God is using Boaz to take care of this woman because she has sought fit to seek shelter under God's wings. Right? Boy, this is good stuff. Hard to quit. But for the sake of time, what we're going to see is she's going to bring a bunch of food home to Naomi. Naomi is going to tell her to stay in that field, let God work, and let God prove. And Boaz goes further to bless her. In verse 16 it says, and let fall some of the handfuls of purpose for her, and leave them, that she may glean them, and rebuke her not. So he tells his workers even, leave more for her than what she's supposed to get. Don't just go by the law. Let's get generous here and show this girl that she can trust in our God. He's going to take care of her. And so Boaz started helping her out. He says, let some extras fall. Handfuls on purpose. Again, all this stuff is really good preaching. But let's just sum it up with this. So she took all of that she had gleaned back home. And look at what Naomi says in verse 19 and 20. As it says, and her mother-in-law said unto her, where hast thou gleaned today? And where wrougest thou? Blessed be he that doth take knowledge of thee. And she showed her mother-in-law with whom she had wrought, and said, the man's name in whom I wrought today is Boaz. And Naomi said unto her daughter-in-law, blessed be the Lord, who hath not left off his kindness to the living and to the dead. And Naomi said to her, the man is near to kin unto us, one of our next kinsmen. And Ruth the Moabitess said, he said unto me, that thou shalt keep fast by my young men until they have ended all my harvest. And Naomi said unto Ruth, her daughter-in-law, it is good, my daughter-in-law, that thou go out with his maidens, that they meet thee not in any other field. So she kept fast by the maidens of Boaz to glean unto the end of the barley harvest and the wheat harvest, and dwelt with her mother-in-law. What a blessing that God has provided for her. And Naomi is starting to see, look, God is blessing here in all of this mess that we have and this hardship that we have. And it didn't bring her husband back. It didn't bring her 2 boys back. But God can bless in the midst of all of those things. And that's what we have to see. That is the fun part in serving God, is to see how he can take bad times and turn them into good. Times when we should be bitter and make them better. Through people like Boaz, through people like Ruth, can turn our lives around. Let God work in your life. Don't get bitter. Don't get, don't start pouting and all this kind of stuff. Pick your head up, get to work, and see what God can do. God is going to take care of you. You've chosen to shelter under his wings. Let him then take you and help you in those situations. A lot of good lessons here. I hate to even quit now, but I'm going to do it for sake of time. Let's pray, and you go back and study them and write down all the lessons that you can learn from this. Okay, that's good homework for you. Write down every lesson you can learn from this. There's an abundance of them. Lord, thank you so much for these 4 blessed chapters that we have in the scriptures, that during this challenging time in the life of Israel, that there were still people that were serving you, like Boaz, like Naomi, like Ruth, that we can look to and say, you know what, we may be in challenging times right now, but we have chosen to shelter under your wings, and you are going to take care of us through these times. Help us not to get bitter, but help us to be better and to get to work and do the things that we can do, that you've given for us to do. We love you and thank you for all that you do. And it's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Thank you so much. Look forward to seeing you next time. Ruth chapter 3 and chapter 4.